Fifth grade ELA. So what does the name Titanic mean to you? How many of you have heard of this ship? In the 1912, the Titanic was the biggest and most luxurious ship in the world. Everybody thought she was the safest too, so the 2,207 people on board were excited about her very first voyage. But the title of this book, Titanic, Disaster at Sea, tells you that things didn't go so well. Let's find out why. This book was written by Martin Jenkins and illustrated by Brian Sanders. At 9 o'clock in the evening on Thursday, April 18, 1912, in the middle of the tremendous thunderstorm, an ocean liner pulled slowly into New York Harbor and prepared to dock. The ship was the Carpathia, one of the dozens that regularly plied to and fro across the North Atlantic. Normally, her arrival would have attracted little attention among the hustle and bustle of the busy port. But this time it was different. Tens of thousands of people had crammed themselves onto the dockside and was waiting expectantly for the Carpathia carried not just her own passengers and crew, but the traumatized survivors of a terrible calamity as well. 4 days earlier, on the night of Sunday, April 14th, the world's largest ship, the Titanic, had hit an iceberg in the middle of the ocean and sunk. Nearly 1,500 people had died. It was the worst ever single shipwreck at sea. Thanks to wireless technology, news of the event had begun to spread almost immediately, so that the late editions of the Monday newspapers in Europe and North America were already reporting that the great ship had suffered some kind of accident. Many of these first accounts, though, turned out to be wildly inaccurate. Some said that the liner had been badly damaged but was still afloat and was being towed to Halifax, Nova Scotia, for repairs. Others reported that the Titanic had indeed sunk, but that all the people on board had been rescued. By Tuesday, as more detailed reports filtered through from Carpathia and other ships that had rushed to the scene, the scale of the disaster and the awful loss of life had become clear. The world was in shock. The Titanic was a brand new ship. This was her first voyage across the Atlantic, and she incorporated the latest innovations in shipbuilding technology. Her builders and virtually everyone else believed that she was practically unsinkable. Over the next few weeks, official inquiries into the accident were held in New York and London. Survivors were interviewed and dozens of expert witnesses cross-examined. Both inquiries had the same goals: to find out exactly what had happened, why it happened, and who, if any, was to blame. The age of the ocean liner. The Titanic began her short existence on March 31st, 1909, when her keel was laid down in the shipyards of Harland and Wolff, a shipbuilding company based in Belfast, Northern Ireland. She had been dreamed up just under 2 years before, in the summer of 1907, by J. Bruce Ismay, managing director of the White Star Line Shipping Company, and Lord Pryor, chairman of the board of Harland and Wolff. At that time, mass air travel was still decades away, and the only means of carrying people and cargo across the sea was by ship. During the previous half-century, steam had been taking over from sail as the main way that the ships were powered. The White Star Line was one of many steamships companies that had been sprung up, all competing for a share of the trade, particularly on the most profitable route across the Atlantic between Europe and North America. The Blue Riband. In the 1860s, rivalry developed between the different companies as to which could cross the Atlantic the fastest. And an unofficial prize, the Blue Ribbon, was awarded to whichever ship held the record, bringing with it great publicity for the company that owned the ship. Among the main companies competing for the Blue Ribbon were the White Star Line and its arch-rival, Cunard. Thomas Ismay, Bruce Ismay's father, owner of the White Star Line at this time, realized that there were more and more rich people wanting to travel and that they didn't want just speed. They wanted luxury as well. Ismay commissioned a new kind of liner from Harland and Wolff, which was both very fast and very, very comfortable. especially in first class. The new liners were a great success, but eventually Ismay decided it was simply too expensive to build liners that were both the most luxurious and the fastest afloat. So he chose to leave the race for the blue ribbon to Cunard and the others. Though no longer competing for the prize, White Star ships would still be fast. But they would also certainly be the most comfortable. Thomas Ismay died in 1892, and his son Bruce took over the firm. Then in 1902, the American tycoon J.P. Morgan gained control of the business and made it part of the shipping combine, International Mercantile Marine. Though Bruce Ismay continued to run the White Star Line, Ismay launched a range of increasingly large ships, culminating in the Oceanic. In 1899, in the Celtic, in 1901, at the time the biggest ships ever to have been built. Then, in 1906, the company's pride was dealt a terrible blow. Their rival Cunard launched the Muratina and the Louisiana liners that were even bigger, faster, and even more luxurious. They could complete the transatlantic journey in under 6 days, and not surprisingly, they quickly grabbed the lion's share of the passenger trade. Olympic, Titanic, and Gigantic. Bruce Ismay and Lord Pierre knew they had to respond to the challenge, and decided they would go one better by building 3 new liners. They'd be called the Olympic, the Titanic, and the Gigantic, later renamed the Britannic. They were bigger than the Cunard ships, carry more passengers, and be seen more luxurious, if not quite as fast. The designs were quickly sketched out and preparations made to start building. It was decided to stagger the construction so that experience gained with the first ship would be applied to the building of the others. First would come the Olympic, then the Titanic, then the Gigantic. The keel of the Olympic was laid down in December 1907. She took 3 years to build and was finally ready for launching in October 1910, by which time work on the Titanic was already far advanced. Although the original plans for the 2 ships had been almost identical, as building went on, various changes were made to the Titanic's design. In particular, it was decided to make some of the first-class facilities even larger and more luxurious. This meant that the Titanic would end up weighing about 1,000 tons more than the Olympic, making her the world's biggest ship. So can you imagine building something this big? What do you think it would be like? Launch day. The Titanic's launch day was eventually set on May 31st, 1911, the same day the Harland and Wolff was due to hand over the Olympic to the White Star Line. It was a great occasion in Belfast, where shipbuilding was by far the most important industry, and it seemed as if half the city turned out to see the 2 ships. Lord Pierre was there, of course, and as were Bruce Ismay and his wife and children. Even J.P. Morgan himself turned up. At the center of them all was Thomas Andrews, the managing director of the shipyard, who had personally overseen the construction of the 2 ships and had played an important part in their design. Although the Titanic was now afloat, she still needed a lot of work before she was ready for service. Her interior needed to be fitted out, her funnels built, and engines and other machinery installed. All this took nearly a year, but gradually the ship neared completion. She really was awe-inspiring. Everything about her was big, from her propellers to her first-class dining room. Steam powers. The Titanic's power came from 3 huge steam engines. To the left and right sides of the ships were 2 traditional-style piston and reciprocating engines, the largest of their kind, and were built nearly 40 feet tall. The third central engine was a turbine powered by used steam from the 2 reciprocating engines. 200 men were needed to keep the fires lit, and when the ships were traveling at cruising speed, they went through nearly 600 tons of coal every 24 hours. Smoke from the fire boxes escaped through the first 3 of the ship's funnels. The 4th funnel wasn't, in fact, necessary, but it was there because the ship's design thought the ship would look odd without it. Instead, it was used as a giant ventilation shaft, carrying cooking smells away from the ship's galleys. Accommodation and facilities. Built around the engines and the boilers were their decks, all 9 of them, with the accommodation and facilities needed to house the passengers and crew. More than 3,000 people in the ship was full. The topmost deck, the boat deck, housed the ship's officers, while the bottommost, known as the orlop, contained only storerooms. The passengers and the rest of the crew were distributed around the 7 decks in between them. From A to G, passenger accommodation was divided into first class, second class, and third class. Each class occupied separate parts of the ship, and each had its own facilities. I'm not really going to get into all that, but that's that. Designed for safety. We're going to skip that part. Wireless technology. Not only were the new ships considered very hard to sink, but the wireless technology developed by Italian inventor, I don't know his name, Marcioni, at the turn of the century, also made it much easier for them to call for help. If they did get into trouble, wireless installations were by now pretty much standard on large ships. With the design of ships improving all the time and a long record of safe voyages on British boats, the ship's owners and the authorities were regulated shipping. Who regulated shipping in Britain? This was the Board of Trade, decided that lifeboats were not a priority. The minimum number of lifeboats was set using a formula based on the weight of the ship. This had last been updated in 1894, when passenger ships all weighed less than 20,000 tons. This meant that ships like the Olympic and the Titanic, which were built to carry a maximum of about 3,500 people, each had to have lifeboat space for only 962 passengers, fewer than 1 in 3 of the people who might be on board, although they were supposed to have life jackets for everyone. In fact, the Titanic had more lifeboats than was required by the rules, as it had 16 normal lifeboats and 4 colossal ones that between them and designed to hold about 1,178 people. The normal lifeboats and 2 of the colossal ones, referred to as C and D, were mounted on DeVault special hoists for raising and lowering the boats. On the boat deck, the other 2 colossal boats, A and B, were rather oddly stored on the roof of the officer quarters. So think about this lifeboat for 1,780 people. When up to 3,500 passengers might be aboard, if someone told you that about a ship you were boarding, what would you think? Would you really get on it? I wouldn't. Voyage preparations. On Tuesday, April 2nd, 1912, the Titanic left the deck in Belfast under the command of Edward J. Smith, the most experienced of the White Star Line's captains. She sailed down the Irish Sea to Southampton in preparation of her maiden voyage to New York. Set to begin on Wednesday, April 10th. For the next week, the ship became the center of a mass of activity. The finishing touches were made inside, deliveries were taken on board, and the crew was recruited.